Let's turn to Israel, the thorn in Gaddafi's plan for pan-Arabism. In October 1985, members of the Palestinian Liberation Front hijacked the Achille Lauro, a Mediterranean cruise ship, and demanded the release of 50 Palestinians from Israel, who refused. To show they meant business, an American Jewish man in a wheelchair, Leon Klinghoffer, was executed and thrown overboard. Reagan, who was seeking a win, latched onto the anti-terrorism issue. The terrorists who fled the cruise ship ended up getting apprehended by American forces headed by Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Remember the Jewish Defense League from the last episode? The hijacking was the catalyst for the assassination of Palestinian activist Alex Odeh. The hijacking also turned up tensions between Israel and Palestine, with power and influence always tipping in Israel's favor. The same year of the hijacking, the country signed a free trade agreement with America and continued to restore relations with Egypt, Ethiopia, Hungary, and others. All the while, it continued its practice of erecting settlements in areas disputed by international law, in Syria and areas claimed as Palestine. In 1986, the same year the country's role in Iran-Contra was revealed, an Israeli technician named Mordechai Vanunu took photos of Israel's nuclear weapons program, revealing that Israel was stocking nuclear arms. He would be extradited from Italy and sentenced to 18 years for treason. Israel was the largest recipient of U.S. military aid in the world. In exchange, America got Middle East counterterrorism intel, military base access, weapons, and tech. Meanwhile, in 1988, 35 through 41% of the American public favored Palestinian statehood, though this sentiment was most common among the higher educated. By 1987, over 40% of the Palestinian workforce labored in Israel and lived under immense repression. When an Israeli truck collided with a civilian car, killing 4 Palestinians, an uprising, or Intifada, followed in the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem.
Israelis are killing us and shooting and beating us all the time. So we think any one of us could do this. Anyone from 6 to 50 might carry out this act.
All Palestinian political parties united for the Intifada, and each faction had a women's committee. Wrote Marcia Gadzo, since it was illegal to be a member of any political party and student union, these women's committees called for knitting, sewing, and cooking meetups in public, but secretly their meetings consisted of planning the Intifada. Over the next 4 years, multiple forms of resistance happened. In addition to organizing boycotts of Israeli goods that eventually forced the Israeli government to negotiate, wrote Suad Baba, women organized economic cooperatives, mobile health clinics, underground schools, and more, sustaining and strengthening the insurrection. There were also thousands of Molotov, hand grenade, gun, and otherwise violent attacks by Palestinians demanding Israel's demise or a two-state solution. The mounting Intifada violence worried moderate Palestinians, who believed that radicals were calling for an escalation of force that would be easily overwhelmed if Israel brought out the big guns, and they had a point. While 179 to 200 Israelis were killed during the 4 years, at least 1,952 Palestinians were killed, most by Israelis, though more than a few were killed by other Palestinians for being suspected collaborators with Israel. Israel's response to Intifada inspired a video game in which the 1989 Washington Post article described, the player is an Israeli soldier on patrol in an Arab city. Palestinians throw rocks and Molotov cocktails at him. His job is to stop the Arab rioters while staying within army orders against opening fire, which become more lenient as the game progresses.
You can use clubs, tear gas, rubber bullets. You can use plastic bullets against Molotov cocktails.
Continued the Washington Post writer, the teenagers themselves, who today play Intifada for fun, tomorrow will play it for real during their 3-year compulsory military service. Under Israel's defense minister, the Israeli army was instructed to break the bones of Palestinian protesters. By 1989, Israel had imprisoned 6,000 Palestinians and held them without trial, with up to 175,000 arrested at some point by the end of the Intifada. Israel had also released 28 members of the Jewish Underground, a terrorist organization that targeted and assassinated Palestinian mayors and students in Hebron in the early 80s. The existence of the terrorist group had been dismissed as two-state solution propaganda until the evidence was undeniable. The group claimed that they were taking a stance against Palestinian violence and that the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt meant that the Israeli settlement project would soon be eradicated. Most received life sentences, but all were released within 7 years, and 20 were released in the first 2 years alone. The terrorists had massive yet divisive support. The demand to release them rose when Israel made the Jabril Agreement in 1985. Israeli citizens felt jilted because Israel swapped 1,150 Palestinian prisoners with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine for 3 Israelis. A petition demanding the release of Jewish underground members collected 300,000 signatures, which represented approximately 7% of the Israeli population at the time. It included support from members of the Israeli labor parties as well as the right wing. For the Israel-Palestine conflict, the end of the 80s saw the United Nations Security Council granting the Palestinian Liberation Organization the right to speak to the council as Palestine, like any sovereign UN member nation. This came after the November 1988 declaration by the PLO that the independent state of Palestine existed in Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Declaration of Independence would be disputed and challenged in the decade to come.